the important thing to remember is that these are well-intentioned parents, that pressure is inherent, parental pressure is inherent in every parent-child relationship. And what parental pressure really does, when it's used effectively, is it promotes a sense of inspiration, guidance, encouragement, and support.
Hello and welcome to episode 45 of the Living and Leading with Emotional Intelligence podcast. I am your somewhat hoarse host for today, Brittney-Nichole, and I want to wish my husband a very happy 30th birthday today, and anyone who's listening who may also be celebrating a birthday today on 5/3. It is an honor and privilege to bring you the guest for this episode, Dr. Hank Weisinger. Dr. Hank and I met on LinkedIn, like many of my guests actually. Dr. Hank is a trained clinical counseling and organizational psychologist. He is the author of several successful books, including New York Times Bestsellers, Nobody's Perfect, and Performing Under Pressure, The Science of Doing Your Best When It Matters Most. He is a leading authority on the application of emotional intelligence and has authored Emotional Intelligence at Work and the first psychologist to customize emotional intelligence to specific industries via the Emotionally Intelligent Financial Advisor and the Emotionally Intelligent Real Estate Agent. He has consulted and conducted workshops to dozens of Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, taught in numerous business school executive education programs and executive MBA programs, including Wharton, UCLA, Cornell, NYU, Penn State, and Columbia. He has appeared on hundreds of information news shows, including The Today Show, Good Morning America, Oprah, CNN, ESPN, and NPR, and his work has been featured in the New York Times, USA Today, TV Guide, and the Wall Street Journal. Very accomplished human being, and I am so grateful to bring his wisdom to you today as he talks about his upcoming new book that he co-authored with Chris Thurber called The Unlikely Art of Parental Pressure. So without further ado, here is Dr. Hank Weisinger. So let's dive in. You ready?
Yep.
Okay. Dr. Weisinger, it is a pleasure to have you on the Living and Leading with Emotional Intelligence podcast. And I want to thank you so much for allowing me to be a beta reader for your upcoming book that we're going to be talking about today, The Unlikely Art of Parental Pressure. What a great read. I will talk more about that later, but before we dive in, I would love for you to take this time to introduce yourselves to our listeners and viewers.
Sure. My name is Hank Weisinger. I am a psychologist, have been in that field for many, many, many years. I really like it, and I found that my interests were on subjects in terms of giving and taking criticism, managing anger, emotional intelligence, performing under pressure. And I like to find subjects that I think that people have issues with, difficulties with, and then create content and writing books around those issues to help those folks out.
So what was the purpose? Because you've written several books. You've had a New York Times bestseller. What inspired you to co-author this book specifically?
I had written a book. The last book I wrote was called Performing Under Pressure. And it was basically for the working world. And I was going to do another book for parents that was oriented on helping their kids handle pressure. And then the cheating scandal, Varsity Blues, happened. And I would say that was my flash of genius. Instead of focusing on the kids, I saw that the real issue would be focusing on the parents. And that's what led to the study of parental pressure. Before I even started writing the book, I must have read all academic studies for at least 6 weeks, 10 hours a day. And I started to be able to flesh out the recurring themes around the psychological construct of parental pressure. And that's where the content for this book, how that started. Yeah, I got tired, to elaborate, of the kids always becoming the victims. What I would see is that a kid could be at a top college, complain that it's stressful, and what the mother or father will say is, take a stress management course, or just focus. The burden of responsibility had always been put on the kid. The kid is the problem. It's the kid who ends up going to a substance abuse program, not the parent. So I wanted to focus on the parents. And what I found, I know it sounds hyperbole, but it isn't, that parental pressure is a global pandemic. It's actually worse in China. It's worse in India. And I was seeing it all over the world. That's why there's a big, in one sense it's sad, but in another sense it's exciting, because I see that's a big market for the topic of this book.
Yeah, and that was actually going to be my next point of conversation, was how you labeled it a pandemic. And it is a pandemic. And I think with many things in our society, when it becomes such a big problem, it also becomes the norm. And so we don't really see it. It just, like school shootings, I mean, it happens so frequently that we grow numb to it.
Exactly. It's become normalized for kids to go to counseling centers and to go to their therapist. One of the things I've noticed about, and we'll talk about this, what I call pressure parents, is they, even when their kid goes to therapy, they're pressuring them, have a good session, as if they're going to get graded in how they come across to their therapist. American Psychological Association came out with a study that counseling centers at universities are basically overwhelmed. They don't have enough counselors for the students, and it is relentless in terms of being under the pressure to have to perform.
Yeah, for sure. And this stems from a cycle, right? This parental pressure typically, as you talk about in the book, is because the parents that are putting this pressure on their children were likely had this pressure put on them or placed on them by their parents.
Yes,
it's a cycle.
That is very, very common. And many parents don't even realize that. Many parents assume it's like students who, the third generation that go to a particular boarding school or a particular college. It's always assumed that the kid wants to go there. I think it's quite a coincidence if somebody has 4 generations going to Harvard that they all wanted to go. You mean there was no other school? Right. And that raises a real issue, which is that parents many times live vicariously through their kids. I always thought it was absurd to congratulate a parent because their kid got into a top school. What I would say is, send my congratulations to your kid. It's a kid who's doing the work. And in therapy, I remember telling one kid where his mother was insistent that he play the violin. I basically said, look, tell your mother if she likes the violin so much, let her play it. You have no interest in doing that. So many times these expectations are handed down without parents realizing that just because something worked for me or I had to do it does not necessarily mean it is best for my kid. Right. And it's just like when parents thought they knew best for their kids, we're finding out. Remember when the Tiger Mom was a big deal in that book on being a tiger mom? Now we know that's the worst advice that any parent could could follow. Unless they
Yeah.
want their son or daughter to end up with mental health problems, then I would advocate that you follow the tiger mom philosophy.
Yeah. And you hit on something where you're talking about what worked well for one parent. They assume that that's the pathway to success. Because I became successful by doing this, then therefore that is the only way. Do you think that now, in a day and age where entrepreneurship is so kind of trending, I guess is a good word for it, where people realize that there's uber successful people and some of the richest people in the world flunked school, were college dropouts, never went to college to begin with. Do you see a shift in how some of these traditional parents view success, or the entry point to success?
I think in terms of, it depends on the social status. Among affluent communities, they want their kid to go to school, and they want them to go to a good school. We have to remember, because, that's an important point. A lot of these people have dropped out of school, but that doesn't mean that they weren't smart to begin with. I think Bill Gates dropped out of Harvard, Zuckerberg dropped out of Harvard, Steve Jobs was at, I think, Carleton College, which is an outstanding school. So these are smart people. I think what they're really saying is the value of college is starting to be changed. And people are looking at that differently. And I think that you'll see changes in the educational system in the next 10 or 15 years that addresses trending differences.
And with
But
Ivy
I will
League
tell you,
schools,
because I
yeah.
had lived in LA for many years, when parents, especially like in West Los Angeles, when their kid got into a good school, they couldn't wait to tell their friends.
Yeah.
That's not, I don't think, is not going to go away. I knew a lady, within 5 minutes of speaking to her, you would know that her daughter was at Yale. Within 5 minutes. So parents have their own needs, many times are met through their kids. And, one of the messages I like to think comes across in the book is for parents to realize, get a life, rather than being so involved in terms of your child. The important thing to remember is that these are well-intentioned parents, that pressure is inherent, parental pressure is inherent in every parent-child relationship. Just like it's natural as an individual that you experience pressure. We have different types of pressure. We have singular pressure, like if you're doing a presentation and you might find pressure to perform. We have relationship pressure. We have peer pressure, social pressure, and there is parental pressure. And what parental pressure really does, when it's used effectively, is it promotes a sense of inspiration, guidance, encouragement, and support. That's how a kid should experience parental pressure, if you're looking out for what is going to be best for the kid, not a feeling of, I have to perform. I have to perform. I have to get good grades. I have to be an outstanding athlete. Otherwise, my parents will not be proud of me.
Right.
They will not love me. They will reject me, is many times the fantasy. Just
Right.
like in our relationships with our significant partner, many times we get into that. They won't love me. They won't support me, and so on.
Very conditional.
Mhm.
Very conditional.
Right.
Yeah. Can you give some examples? Because in the book, you do talk about the difference between healthy pressure versus harmful pressure. There's some subtleties there, right? Like it's, yeah.
Yes, I started out with the observation that there are many successful young people who great successes, and they're also mentally healthy. There are also kids who can be very successful, but they're seeing a therapist twice a week. Or they're not successful and they also have a host of mental health problems. And when I looked at those two groups, I found that a determining factor was how their parents exerted pressure upon them. And I found that there were three big differences between what I will call pressure parents and supportive parents. One focused around parental warmth, another was around parental communication, and another was parental involvement. And then there would be differences within those three categories. For example, parental communication, the big three differences were around criticism, praise, and the use of questions. A pressure parent, for example, will use a question to interrogate. What did you do? Who are you talking to? What'd you get on the test? A supportive parent will use questions to help their son or daughter articulate their feelings or their interests. When it comes to criticism, a pressure parent will focus on flaw finding. You know, the kid gets a 95. How come you missed these 5 problems or something? Or maybe they'll say things, maybe you'll get 100 next time.
Yeah.
Whereas supportive parents use criticism simply to educate and instruct and guide. A supportive parent, whenever they give criticism, is always thinking, how can I communicate this information so it will benefit my son or daughter? Where a pressure parent is basically using criticism to tell their son or daughter that they did something wrong.
Right.
And with praise, it's like in the corporate world, I used to tell managers that the most useless thing they could say to a subordinate is good job, because it's meaningless. What does that even mean? Good job. And that's what pressure parents do. Good job, because they're only focused on the outcome.
Not the effort.
Whereas supportive parents will say, I really like the way you delivered the lines in your play, or I really like the way that you wrote the ending or your conclusions in your essay. In other words, they are specific because that communicates to the son or daughter that they're really paying attention. And an important point for listeners to remember, because a lot of parents will say, well, I don't put pressure on my kid. It really doesn't matter what the parent thinks. That parental pressure is always defined from the child. It's like parental warmth. Parental warmth, the parent can say, oh, I'm very warm. Not if the kid doesn't perceive it. So this is one of the interesting things about the subject, that it's always defined from the kid's perspective. In other words, parental pressure is really occurs when the son or daughter perceives that the expectations are almost impossible to meet. But what is interesting, because I was like this, if you recall in the book, I was a very poor student in high school. My co-author was a top-notch student. My mother always used to tell me, and the same thing I tell my kids, it only matters where you end up. Doesn't matter where you start out. I couldn't wait to go back to my 50th high school reunion, because I was a terrible high school student. Bottom line is, I was the only one who had written at the time 9 books or 10 books, and carpooled with Meryl Streep when I lived in LA. I had great stories at my reunion. So it's really the kid's perspective. If the kid thinks the parent is cold, the parent's cold. If the kid thinks the parent, when we talk about parental involvement, the rule of thumb is this: if it's the right amount of involvement, you're supportive. If it's too much involvement, you are intrusive. And it's up to the kid to decide. What I've noticed is that pressure parents will barge into the kid's room without knocking. Supportive parents will knock because they respect boundaries. The hot term now is what's called EOI parents, emotionally over-involved. So a controlling mother might want to pick out the prom dress for their daughter. The emotionally over-involved mother wants to actually go to the prom with their daughter. Just like the emotionally over-involved father wants to be on the field playing, in the game. So those three things I would invite all your listeners to think about: warmth, communication, and involvement. And warmth is a tricky one. Remember, when you were born, the first thing your mother did was to hold you close, to keep you warm. Animals, many of them have pouches to keep the baby warm because you're born wet and cold. People always tell you come in from the cold, and you're hardwired really to want to have a degree of warmth. But yet parents need to think, how do you express warmth to your kids? How many times have I seen a parent drop their kid off at college, freshman year, and they shake hands with their kid when they say goodbye? I can't understand that. It's my son is 31. I'll still kiss him hello. My daughter's 36. There's always hugs. And yet many parents feel very uncomfortable to use tactile communication as a way of expressing warmth, especially when the son or daughter is not performing well. Did you ever see the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer?
No.
About a young chess prodigy.
Mm-mm.
And there's a scene where he loses a game he should have won. And his father is, sort of scolding him. How could you lose to this kid? And the kid, who's like 8 years old, says, "Dad, why are you standing so far away from me?" And then the father realizes what he's doing. And he goes over and gives him a hug. I'm watching Bad News Bears, the original one with Walter Matthau and Tatum O'Neal last night. And when Walter Matthau, who's the coach of these kids, who are just terrible, but when he sees the other coach berating these 10-year-olds, he realizes what he's been doing. And he says, let's just have fun. And the warmth starts to come out. I can have very high expectations of you. And that's okay, even if they're unrealistic. As long as if you don't meet those expectations, I still give you a hug. Then it's okay. Because then we realize it didn't really matter. Whereas many parents will have high expectations of their kids, and when the kids don't perform, the parent is very cold and gives them the cold shoulder.
Yeah.
And that's what only increases the kid's feeling that he or she needs to perform. Now, when I was in high school, I experienced no parental pressure because I didn't care. See, if you're my parent and you have high expectations, the more I feel I need to adhere to those expectations, the more pressure I will feel. So I would say to a lot of high school students, blow off your parents' expectations as a way of reducing the pressure that you feel. Because this is the bind that when you feel you're performing for somebody else, you can never be happy. And it's usually never going to be good enough as well.
Right. I want to expand upon that warmth that you're talking about, because it's like many things, easier said than done. If that parent never experienced what true unconditional love and understanding was like, it can be very challenging for them to express that to someone else.
That's right.
So how do parents develop that? Because I feel like you kind of have to develop that self-compassion and warmth for yourself in order to show that.
You hit it right on the nose. The first step is for the parent to get comfortable with his or her own feelings and feelings of vulnerability. And I think a very good way of doing that is through watching films. Just like many times in the old days, you'd read books together. I think watching films together that illustrate parent-kid relationships and then talking to them. For example, I don't know if you ever saw Dead Poets Society.
Mm-hmm.
So for those who had, and there is a scene where the kid is in a private school and he wants to go into acting. And the father says, "Are you crazy? Forget no more acting and no more plays. You're going to be a doctor." And what inevitably happens is the kid commits suicide.
Yeah.
On that. One of the ways that parents can communicate parental warmth is actually listening to the feelings of what their kids have to say. See, that makes a lot of parents uncomfortable
Mhm.
because you're right. A lot of them come from backgrounds that were very cold. The classic movie when I was growing up of parental pressure, with relationships was Love Story, where the storyline, Oliver Barrett at Harvard, his father's a multimillionaire, falls in love with the girl who is smart, but from the wrong side of the tracks. And the father says, you marry this girl and I won't give you the time of day, and so on. Now, the contemporary version, the remake of that, is Crazy Rich Asians, which had the same storyline. The rich guy falls in love with the poor girl. I think watching movies like that and then discussing them is a
Mm.
very good way for a parent to get in touch with his or her own feelings, and to see how they express them. I think a parent can start just by introducing tactile communication. How many parents really hug their kids every day? How
Yeah.
many of them kiss them every day? How many of them give them a call just to say, I just called to tell you that I love you? What pressure parents are doing is calling their kids to say, did you get your test back? What'd you get on the social studies, exam? So parents have to become more comfortable with their own
Mhm.
emotions.
Yeah.
That's where emotional intelligence and self-awareness starts to come in. Get comfortable with your own emotions, your own feelings, and express feelings. A good little exercise is for a parent, both parents, to say, how do we express warmth to our kids? And to have a discussion about that.
Mhm.
That would be a starting point.
One other thing that you mentioned in the book is that, when we have these expectations, we should expect the best out of the child, their best, not the best.
Exactly. And that's what most parents don't do.
Yeah.
Most parents have the expectation, oh, you're in a track meet, and they expect them to win. See,
Mhm.
that's because pressure parents are very competitive. One of the things I used to say to my son all the time when he would come home from school is, did you have fun? How many laughs did you have? When he would play soccer when he was 8 years old, was it fun? That's the only thing I cared about. I remember hearing one father saying to his son, you've got to practice your kicking. The kid was like 7 years old. What kind of thing is that to say? That comes from a father who wants his son to be the best player on the field.
Yeah.
So it's an important point in terms of expectations. What parents should expect and want to teach is their kid always to do their best, not to be the best. Because if you have to be the best, then you're becoming competitive and you can never be satisfied, because there's always
Right.
going to be somebody that is smarter, better looking, prettier, wealthier. Where does it end?
Yeah.
And the irony is you can't do better than your best anyway. A C student is never getting 1600 on their SATs unless they cheat.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually just did a podcast yesterday, with some of the top things not to say to your children. And a few of those is practice makes perfect, right? Because the perfection is elusive. Nobody can be
That's
perfect.
right.
And someone's definition of what is the closest thing to perfect could be completely different than someone else, right?
Yeah.
And so it sends the wrong message, and kids beat themselves up because it's like, well, I'm practicing. Why am I not perfect? But at the same time, that implies that all practice leads to perfection. You can practice something and develop a very bad habit because
Hmm.
practice is just that reinforcement of doing the same thing over again.
Correct. And that is why those parents are very outcome oriented. See, they're looking for perfection versus the parent who says, enjoy what you're doing, enjoy the process of it. And those people, rewarding effort is much better than rewarding outcome. Because what any parent, at least I'll speak speak for myself, but I know other parents feel the same way, is what do you want from your child? You want him or her to do his best. And this is a message I always tell my kids: focus on doing your best and good things will happen, because that's the best you can do. Just
Yeah.
keep doing your best, because your best will be good enough.
Yeah. And when it comes to these types of parents, they tend to be very stuck and stubborn in their ways. And it seems from my experience, I don't necessarily work with those type of parents just yet, but even working with other people in this area, it's almost like if they believe they don't have a problem, then they don't have a problem. It's not until we decide that we need to change that we're going to change. There's nothing that we can say to change how they think. So it's kind of like working with their kids, this generation, so that they don't continue that cycle,
Yeah, I used to tell
right?
parents when I would do a lot of therapy, I would say to the parents, how much worse does your son or daughter have to get before you're willing to change your behavior?
Yeah.
And that's what see, again, that's where self-awareness.
Mhm.
Parents need to step back and start to look at, how am I interacting with my kid? And is it helping them, or is it making it worse? Am I helping them act productively or counterproductively? And a lot of parents, I found, a big issue is they don't want to accept the fact that their kids are never going to be number one. That is a hard realization for many parents, especially if they were successful. And I think you saw a lot of that in the Varsity Blues thing. I think that those parents, I mean, Lori Loughlin, I think, was more concerned with being able to say to her friends in LA, my daughter is going to USC, because that's status,
Mhm.
versus some unknown type of school. So parents continue to do these things that make them, look good, rather than thinking what is right for the kid. How many parents have said, you can do anything you want, be anything you want, but the meta message is, as long as I approve. Oh, you can go to any school you want as long as I approve.
Right.
Oh yeah, you can marry anybody you want, but if I don't like the person, I'm not paying for the wedding. You can buy any house you want, I'll help you, but I have to approve of the
Without my support. You can
right.
do it, but I am not going to be a part of it.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's right.
And it really doesn't help that universities are making it increasingly difficult for students to get in.
Well, you're right, and that's a good observation. And the reality is, though, from the university's perspective, that's what they want. A school like Harvard, now it's down, their acceptance ratio, I think, is down to 3%. They want that, because now we can raise our tuition, because this is the place to go, and so on. So uh, this is why I said, I think in the next 15 years, you're going to see some differences. I think a lot of schools are already getting rid of SAT scores, at least certainly in California. And you know who the people who are the most outraged about that? The people who are in the SAT tutoring business.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. Yeah.
Right.
One thing I want to add to what you're saying, because we talk about pressure parents, but there are parents who have this, it's still putting pressure on the kid, but in a different way. So, for example, I was raised, my parents would always say, you're so smart, you're so talented. And they're not really coming out and saying, like, this is the pressure I'm putting on you, but they're saying that you are smart. Therefore, if you don't perform at a certain level, even though it's not communicated, when you fell, you're like, but I'm smart. But that can also lead, like it led me, to blame my teacher, to say,
Mhm.
well, they're giving me too much work. Well, the teacher's the one that's stupid.
Mhm.
And not taking ownership and responsibility, because if I'm smart, then it should come naturally to me. So then everyone else is the problem.
Exactly. Yeah, that is a good perception. And that happens a lot, because there are many ways of how parents can put pressure on their kids, like guilt. After all I've done for you?
Oh gosh,
Oh,
yes.
you know how much these violin lessons have costing?
Yeah.
Or dance lessons or
Mhm.
whatever. So there are many ways, and when the parent is always telling the kid you're smart or you're the best athlete, and
Yeah.
then the kid goes and he sees their kid that he's really an average athlete.
Yeah. And then they
That can
take it
be
out
also, yeah. And
on
it's like
in
telling the
life.
girl,
Yeah.
you're beautiful, uh, but yet nobody's asking her out.
Mhm.
What
Mhm.
what what is going, what is going on? So where it's both girls and boys have to deal with that of being told they're great, and the parent needs to give them encouragement. That's why a better strategy is for the parent just to say, just do your best, be the best person you can be, and that's how you make a kid confident, optimistic, tenacious, and enthusiastic.
Right. And it kind of leads to a sense of entitlement in a way, because I know that a lot of my generation, the millennials, everybody talks about all these millennials, they're so entitled, but it's our parents' generation that are calling us entitled. And it's how they parented that kind of led to that entitlement, right? In a way. And part of that is you are the best, you're this, you're that. Well, then reality hits when you're in college and when you're in the workforce, and then you get that honest feedback. And now you're kind of, like I said, in denial of, well, no, I'm not. I don't suck at this, or no, I don't need to work better at this. You're the one that has the problem.
Right. I remember telling my son once after I said, Danny, you really played good. You really played well. And he said, Dad, I'm not great. I just like playing with my friends. And I thought that's great awareness on that. Rather than the person who's told they are the best and you're great, and then they don't know how to deal with the fact when they see that they are just average, whether it's
Average.
an average musician or an average dancer or an average student. And this is one of the difficulties that many bright kids have when they were stars in high school, maybe the smartest kid in the school, and then they go to a small, college, and everybody was the valedictorian of their high
Yeah.
school, and
Yeah.
it changes the field. But the kid who had supportive parents doesn't care because they're just doing their best. It's a terrible problem. It's a terrible way to live when you are always comparing yourself to other people.
Hmm. Yeah. Compare yourself to yourself. How have I
Just be
improved?
the best you can be. That's the message that I think really helps
Yeah.
a kid navigate his or her life effectively. Just focus on doing the best you can.
Well, like I said before, I thoroughly enjoyed reading this book because it has a blend of everything that I believe makes a good book. And that is data, storytelling, and practical advice for how to parent in a more positive way with healthy pressure. And you also have some great graphics and charts and visuals in this book as well. So,
And I
so tell
appreciate you
us,
saying that.
when does it come out?
It
Where
comes
can people
out. It
find
comes
it?
out July. And let me just say that the overall goal of the book is to acknowledge that parents have good intentions, but their unrealistic expectations uh, and the pressure on them to become good parents
Hmm.
and make your kid. I mean, we think that you're a good parent if your kid got into a good school, and you're a bad parent if your kid got into a bad school.
Right.
And the idea is that pressure is, again, defined from the kid's point of view. And what Chris and I are hoping what this book will do is help parents transform unhealthy parental pressure, which is a feeling from the kid's point of view, I can never meet these expectations, they're impossible,
Hmm.
into a feeling where the child feels inspired, encouraged, uh, and motivated. And that is how, when we see it's a force, think, pressure, like if I press hard on your shoulder, you'll feel pressure. Pressure is really a physical force. That's the origin of it. The physical came a lot earlier than the psychological. And just like physical pressure can be transformed from water pressure, gas pressure, all different types, so can psychological pressure. And that's how we want it to be transformed. So it becomes a force. So we can say to the parents, may the force be with you. That's the
Love
real
that. Yeah.
meaning of that. And the book will be out July 20th. It's already on Amazon. We're creating an online class around it, which we are very excited about.
Wonderful.
And I think that parents will find it to be very useful and enlightening.
I agree. And even if you're not a parent, that was one thing reading this book, you don't have to be a parent to benefit from this because it really tells you a lot about how you perceive yourself and interact with others in the world based on those pressures that were put on you potentially, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And even if you're a boss, because essentially you're kind of treating your subordinates, so to speak, as your children, or at least some bosses do. So this could even, like you were talking about in the workplace. So
Absolutely.
100%. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hank. It has been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed speaking with you.
Yes, likewise.